Too many people are worried about how things sound to other people. That's not why we do it. And I think looking at mental health, I'm just sitting there watching the catastrophic impacts of coronavirus unfold before my eyes. They actually think that I've met the McCanns. Like, she definitely had, she had no involvement. I've never met anybody who's haunted. I don't like trauma. I think everything should be happy in films and stuff like that.
Hi guys, welcome back to the Finlay and Luke show. I'm Luke, and that's not Finlay. He's not had a makeover. This is the brilliant Emma Kenny. Emma, thank you for coming on.
It's fine. I'm very disappointed in Finlay, and I think that Finlay needs to write me a letter explaining why his presence is not here. How dare you?
He'll be really upset about it.
Oh, it's just Emma Kenny. She's so negligible. Bring me up and get me in when somebody important's in.
No, I do appreciate you coming on. You're the second female guest we've had. First, full female guest. We had my friend Lauren on for a bit, and where she just bullied Finlay basically for half an hour. So I think it goes without saying you're also the biggest guest.
Oh, so. Well, I mean, this is where you start. It's a low bar, but exactly. Keep climbing, kid. Keep climbing.
I know. Well, that's the aim. I mean, the podcasts that we've done so far are hit and miss anyway. So
the podcast should be just about your life, what you're interested in, who you are. It shouldn't be about a judgment call. Too many people are worried about how things sound to other people. That's not why we do it, is it? It's about expressing yourself and going on a journey. And I think that that's what makes them interesting. If they're perfect, they drive me mad. I want to hear people being real. It's as simple as that.
Well, we did a podcast about the whole protests in America and stuff like that. I remember me and Finlay were like, it's going to go one of two ways. It's not got the most views in mode. I'm not bothered about that. I know what we said in that video just came from the heart, and we were being serious about it. We went to a protest in Manchester.
Yeah, so did we.
Peaceful. It was dead nice.
Yeah.
And I feel I think it's just the way YouTube works. The shit content always gets more views. Well, not necessarily always the shit content, but the content which is more silly and goofy, but whereas the serious content is always towards low, which is a bit of a shame because some of the better stuff is serious.
There. Yeah. The thing is, it's not really about the fact that you have to have a serious one or a funny one. The funny ones are great, but the serious ones, even if you get a third of the viewers, they'll all be impacted on by it. So it's really important to have those ones, even though they might not get the views. If you change somebody's perspective, even one person, then it's worthy of being up there. And I think that that's what society's kind of got a bit screwed up on these days. It's very much about a numbers game. How's that video doing? I'll post something profound about the way that the government is shafting us, or the way that employers are using loopholes in the lockdown coronavirus so that they can kind of furlough and then sack staff and then bring them back on crap contracts. But then I'll post one about my squirrel and I'll get 40,000 views, and you're like, yeah.
But I tell you what, Junior the Squirrel's pretty cool.
He is. Junior the Squirrel should have his own podcast. If only Junior could speak.
Have you got his own Instagram yet?
My husband does. I don't get involved in that craziness because I just find it really pressurizing. I struggle with my own social media. I really do. I kind of have rules over social media, which are that, firstly, I have to respond to everybody because everybody's time is as important as me. And I do get quite a lot of responses. So I want to make sure that people feel heard. And then on top of that, I don't like any toxicity, which is interesting, particularly on Twitter. So I have to kind of really manage that. And squirrels are contentious because the grey squirrel, it's illegal to free grey squirrels and you have to kill them if you get them, or you have to keep them and have a wild animal license, which is what we do. So it's one of those where people are just like, grey squirrels are vermin, and I can't individually go around people's houses and smack them in the faces because you're not legally allowed to do that, but that provokes a response in me. So I don't want to deal with that negativity and hostility and frustration, so I just let it go. But he is amazing. And I try to do a lot around animals because we're all plant-based in my family, and I have been since I was a young child, and my boys have all been plant-based since day one, and we have a big ethos in our life that animals and humans matter in the same way, and people are very angry when you say things like that, particularly at the moment. But for us, life is life, and nobody has the right to take that life no matter what. So it's kind of a struggle for us in the current climate, because when we see things about Black Lives Matter, and they do, and prejudice and racism is frigging horrible in the UK. I can't bear it when I say every life matters when they're talking about what they mean is white life matters. That drives me mad. But on a lower level than that, vegans have been trying to get out there for years that life really matters, you know, like it's powerfully important that we protect everybody and everything, and that we don't discriminate. And so when we talk about discrimination, like, animals are the most discriminated sentient beings in the world, but nobody cares.
It's like no one cares, or everyone's offended by everything.
Yeah,
I could say it's
that's
a sunny
right.
day, and someone will be like, "How could you say it's? I can't believe you said it's a sunny day."
Yeah.
It's stuff like that. I just think, just have a walk,
Well, you're
man.
right. And, you know, I think what's really worrying at the moment, and I talk very openly on my own channels about this, social media was once a place where I think it was about democratic thought and an opportunity to express yourself and to meet the opportunity of other people disagreeing with you. However, it's become a place of cancel culture now.
Yeah,
The problem with cancel culture is the minute that you cancel something or somebody because they've said something that you may disagree with, you completely transform the opportunity for people to learn. So instead, people just learn not to say the things that they feel. Well, if you don't say what you feel, I can't challenge it, I can't change it. If you lose your job over having an opinion that you're not schooled enough on, then you're never going to break an opportunity to have that discussion and alter that opinion, or indeed alter some of my opinion. So I think that I'm really worried about that at the moment, because I think it's a form of control. I think we're feeling more control than we've ever felt.
yeah,
And
definitely with the lockdown and everything like that.
just full stop, the whole oppression in our society at the moment is really, really powerful and really scary. And it's amazing for me that people are really angry with young people who are breaking lockdown. And I'm on the radio getting asked those questions and being completely empathic and saying, I completely understand why kids are going to raves. I think it's the most sensible thing they could probably do, because they're an animal and animals need other animals. And just because somebody mandates lockdown and tells you should stay in, I think it's amazing that the UK public have done it. Can't quite believe that most of them have, but I'm certainly not going to be angry with people who decided they couldn't do it. They're normal. It's not us who are normal. It's not the UK population who stayed in and not met their families and not gone out of their homes. That's not normal. That's the most abnormal human behavior that there has ever been. So let's not criticize younger people or people who failed not to be locked down. They're normal.
Yeah,
They are
exactly.
healthy, normal humans.
To be fair, it doesn't really help when, the person who's supposed to be in charge of the country says, all right, you stay in, then you go out, but you stay in, but you go out, you stay in, go out. He changes his mind every single day.
Well, it
Like,
was
it's
quite
just
interesting that
confusing.
you could get in a car and go to work with 4 people with the windows down, but you couldn't hang out with your family. I mean, that's
Yeah,
the
it's just,
massive contradiction. But I think, full stop, the problem with the government, and I don't feel any empathy or sympathy really with the Conservatives. I'm a
who
deep red
does?
and always have been. I brought up
Same,
working class, and I don't understand how anybody in the UK who has been brought up in the working or working middle classes could vote for the Conservatives. It seems to have happened. It blows my mind, because they really don't care about you at all. They just care about themselves. And that's what happens when you go to boys' schools and you attend Eton and so on and so forth. And I'm sorry, that's the reality of it. I'm not saying something we don't know. It's the reality of it. It's about an individualistic approach as opposed to a community approach. And they're clever. The Tories are clever, because what they make you think is that they understand that you can achieve and that you should always have the opportunity to achieve, and you should be able to afford another second home, and then you don't want to be horribly taxed on it like Corbyn would do. And they tell you a very, very probable
yeah.
hope story of anybody can achieve this, and don't worry, we won't have your money taken away from you, and so on and so forth. And that kind of speaks to our egotistical, individualistic side, but it's not good for our community. And when it comes down to leading by example, well, when have they ever led by example? I mean, they wanted to cancel school meals. I mean, that says something really pivotal about the way that they feel about people who are in poverty. And
Yeah,
we had this whole Black Lives Matter thing, and that is pertinently true. But what we don't tell the story of is that the most affected by poverty are the BAME community. They are highly and significantly more likely to be in poverty. So prejudice, when we're talking about free school meals being stopped, is basically affecting the BAME community even further. So it's just so skewed, our community at the moment. And lockdown has just been more of an expression of oppression than I could ever have imagined. And what I was saying at the very beginning of that is, in spite of saying all that about the Tories, I do think it was impossible for them. I don't know why
yeah,
human beings think it's the job of the government to protect us from Mother Nature.
yeah. I feel like everyone has to play the part in this. Like,
Right.
there was, I think I remember when lockdown first started, I think there was, you can go out to the shops once a day, or you can go help someone in need and that once a day. And it's gone from that. And I remember at first, I saw maybe 2 people outside a day.
Yeah.
As weeks go on, more and more people just go out because I think there was more of a fear of coronavirus than there was actually coronavirus at the time. And as time's come on, it's switched the other way around. Like my nan, she just before everything happened, she went into like a 6-week like review because she'd done a hip in. She'd been ill for years. Anyway, she ended up dying, and it's gone down as a coronavirus
Coronavirus.
death. So I couldn't even go to like her funeral. I had to, stay in the car park at the crematorium. Even then, you couldn't have like anything you want at the funeral. She has to be buried in certain clothes, certain casket, all that stuff. It's horrible. And then it annoys me to a degree when I see people like at the park like having barbecues and that. But even then, I can't say much because I've been out during lockdown. I mean, fucking hell, I went to another country. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. But at
So
the end of the day, though, you still have to think about your mental health. Like,
yeah,
I appreciate that as a community, we want to protect those who are vulnerable, which we should, but they should shield, and the rest of the country should just carry on as normal. Because otherwise, we're looking at catastrophic mental health implications, catastrophic economy implications, and most importantly, on a personal level, people going through their first experience of depression and anxiety. These are things that kill you. Stress is the biggest cause of disease. Heart attacks are going to go up, cancers are going to go up, and so on and so forth. So ultimately, you have to get back to normal. And what we're doing now is denying our reality. We die. I think that one of the bigger problems that we have to ask ourselves is, why on earth have people been running around saying, have you heard about this thing, this terrible thing, this thing that I've heard about, it's called death. I mean, it shocks me that we're so discombobulated from what actually we are. Like, if you get to live a healthy life because as a host you look after yourself, then that's great. If you need to take some personal autonomy over your body and your well-being, then it's time to do that now, because it's given us a wake-up call about those people who maybe need to explore that, because comorbidities are problematic, particularly diabetes type 2, which is weight related. But aside from those things, you're going to die. So this virus is only what exists in other viruses. I had flu in 1999 and I nearly died. I was in hospital for 3 years. I couldn't even walk at the beginning of it, or towards the end I was far better at the last 3 or 4 days, but I was in intensive care for 6 days. And that showed me that no matter how healthy you are always at risk from Mother Nature. Things happen. And I went through that, and it really helped me to form an identity with death. I remember it was touch and go whether I'd live, and having this really, really existential experience of peace. It's really hard to describe. I've read about it since, and I assume it's to do with your body starting to shut down. But as opposed to it being scary, it was just wonderful. I just remember feeling this overwhelming feeling of giving up the struggle and just letting my body be. And I remembered thinking, oh, I think this is probably where it's going to end. I'd signed my death benefits form for my mother and father, and I genuinely felt like it was okay. So I think since then I've had a much more pragmatic attitude towards life and death, and I think it would be good for all of us to do a bit more of that, because we are going to die. Nothing's going to stop that happening.
oh yeah.
And it's a time frame issue. And if you look after yourself and kind of take care of your mental and physical well-being, then hopefully that ticking time bomb will give you a little bit further down the road. And I'm not blaming people who've got sick with coronavirus. I'm my heck. Kate from Good Morning Britain, her husband's seriously unwell in a coma because of it. So, bad things happen to good people constantly. But the idea that we can protect ourselves from disease is a very fragile belief system to hold, and one that's proven day in, day out to be incorrect.
No, definitely. I think like there's not been anything this serious. It certainly in my lifetime. I don't think there's been anything that I've seen like an entire country unite.
Oh,
Moreover,
entire world has been going
yeah,
through it as well, hasn't it? Yeah, I mean, I think that we've united on some levels. I think that there's a lot of division at the moment too, though. I'm sure you feel that as a young person. I think it's harder for you. Certainly my own boys have kind of a sense of stunning shock at how the country has kind of fallen into this situation of late, where there's a lot of anger. I think that that's the feeling I pick up mostly at the moment, that people have all got opinions, and a lot of them are quite hostile opinions. And I would like to see more unity. I think that at the beginning it felt like everybody was in this together, and people would start talking about wars, and I mean there's no war happened. I find it really disrespectful when we use that kind of language, because you know, great grandparents and grandparents, they know what war's like, and it involves you getting bombed and your family not coming home because they've been fighting for a cause and stuff.
And that's what
And
happened to my granddad. Like,
yeah,
he was an engineer, but because he was in Newcastle, and Nana was there at the same time, I didn't find out until recently, but their house was bombed because it's on the
yeah,
shoreline, and
yeah,
they lost everything, and they moved to Manchester from there. It's crazy to think, like, I don't think people, especially younger people, realize how crazy it was back then for stuff
yeah,
like that. Like, we've never experienced anything this. Like,
no.
there was the stuff in like early January, February about America and Korea and stuff like that, and now I know there's the China and India stuff now, and people like they'll make jokes about it, but when it actually gets something serious, I don't know how
Yeah,
most people my age would cope.
it's that thing about mutually assured destruction. You just always hope that all these leaders are just a little bit too self-important, that they would never actually cause that much harm to themselves, which is why hopefully that whole idea of mad is the thing that kind of ties us together. It's been an interesting time for me. I mean, I think looking at mental health, I'm just sitting there watching the catastrophic impacts of coronavirus unfold before my eyes, and still this conversation where people talk about the fact that we've got to worry about people's mental health and wellness, and you know that this is a ticking time bomb, but actually still no services being presented, the government doing nothing about helping mental health. And that worries me because of the fact that I think that young people more than ever are at risk of things like suicide, and we see that statistically. And I often ask myself the questions about what gets young people to that point, and I don't know whether it's a part of just rebellion, like an unwillingness to stick with a system that just feels that it doesn't work for them. I don't know whether it is just the contributory factors that amalgamate to that decision, whether it's just that they have that lack of foundation and don't feel that there is a resonance of hope. I don't know what it is, but I do fear at the moment that young people are facing probably one of the most, now I'm not going to say challenging times in comparison to things like, you know, Nazi warfare. It's a different type of challenge, but I think young people have never been less tethered. I think
Mm,
that it's really difficult. You know, you've got the biggest amount of debt, you've got the lowest amount of economic stability, you have the problems with employment and employers, you have the division between the class system of people who are really rich versus people who are really poor, and this is a chasm that's growing. And then you have people like Piers Morgan who refer to younger people as snowflakes, and this complete denouncing of the fact that you are sentient creatures with your own sense of being, and you know,
mm,
trying to figure out how the hell to make it through a world that by 21 you might have £60,000 worth of debt and no job to go to. We live in a country that's turned upside down and on its head regarding how we look after the very future that we're meant to take care of, which is young people.
mm.
It seems crazy to me. How is it as a young person, from your point of view in the UK, when you actually stop and think about what the future holds? What's your position on it?
I'm just completely baffled. Like, I think going into like the summer anyway, I still didn't know what I wanted to do, whether I wanted to go uni or go full time. I think I like sort of decided like I want to do like full time work for a year, see what I want, because I don't want to rush into anything. But now that all this has happened, like I've seen some of my friends lose their apprenticeships. You know, people are down whether they're going to go to uni or not. You know, there's a whole entire just plethora of things which are obstructing like progress for young people, I think. And for me, I've I feel like I'm reacting surprisingly calm about it. Like, all I'm doing most days, excuse me, sorry, is just watching Netflix and like TV and stuff. Like, I've been rewatching How I Met Your Mother for about the 12th time. I'm watching Mad Men again, stuff like that. Like,
Such a sad ending. Such a sad
ah,
ending.
How I
I
Met
don't
Your
like
Mother.
trauma. I think everything should be happy in films and stuff like that. I just don't get it. I don't get why they kill the animals in Bambi and, you know, Disney. There's always a bloody death, you
Watership Down
know.
was a rough film to
Oh
watch.
my God, I've got a mug that's got a picture of a rabbit reading it just with fucking hell up the top of it. And it's like, yeah, that's exactly how the rabbit would feel. Fuck me, this is not okay. But it's also trauma is placed in everything that you watch. And that program that you're talking about there, you know, it's really, really funny, but then like the guy's dad dies in it, and then like she's dead, and it's like, why can't it just be like the Friends ending? They all go on the separate ways.
Oh, don't tell me you like Friends.
I don't think that you could have grown up in my era without finding that an amusing opportunity to just escape on a Sunday, because they used to play like all of them on a Sunday. This is before you had the opportunity to just go online and watch what you want. You know, it's before the opportunity to actually watch a program and then just watch the entire series in one sitting. You know, you are spoiled. For people like me, if you wanted to watch it, you had to wait. It was called patience. You don't know what that is. It's not what young people know, but that was it. But yeah, I used to watch that. I used to watch things like Dawson's Creek as well, because I used to live with somebody who used to love that. So you just get brought in to these kind of zones. You're not interested, not as badly as my brother, who was brought in by his partner to Strictly Come Dancing, which is something I could never associate with. So I you know, immediacy and all of that. I think distraction, as you're saying about how you've dealt with it, is one thing, but really a lot of people at the moment are feeling basically really exhausted. I mean, I'm sure you've got mates a bit like, you know, Finlay, who's just not made it to today. He's probably struggling with his prefrontal cortex, because the part of your brain that's needed for critical and higher thinking, which is the prefrontal cortex, is where all your big decisions are made. It's where you kind of negotiate how you feel. It's how you have a pleasant conversation with a friend when you've got a difficulty to discuss. That when you get a level of stress, it gets impaired, and then this part of your brain called the amygdala takes over, and that's the instinctual area. So the idea is that if you have to run out of the way of a car, the bit of higher reasoning doesn't need to work, because obviously you don't need to think, how shall I do this? You need to just get out
there
of
for
the
a few
car,
minutes,
right? Exactly. You know, you're dead at that point. So your amygdala takes over and you get out of the way of the car. And the problem is we've had a sustained period of stress and anxiety for 3 months. So that area of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, has basically been massively impaired. So even if you're not consciously aware of how it's impacted on you, the chances are you feel tireder or less motivated, or you can't be asked doing things that you know really you should be doing.
Less motivated.
And a lot of people think that's because they're failing or they're not doing enough, but it's not. It's because clinically your brain's been impaired, and we don't really get out and talk about that. The same with, you've heard a lot about people who've died of coronavirus. You've heard a lot of people statistically who've been affected by it. You've been told all these difficult stories and challenging pieces of vicarious, traumatizing information. But have you been told anything about how to stay healthy? Have you been advised how to look after your diet and well-being? No. And that's the irony. The very thing that you should be being pumped full of is information of self-protection. But instead, that doesn't sell barbecues. So the Daily Mail don't want you to read about now nice things that would make you healthy. They want you to go on the clickbait so that you get the cost per mile of marketing. And then you might buy the barbecue they're advertising in the video at the beginning. That's what they want. So our whole society is based on this political climate that's managed by the press.
Well, even then, like when all the protests were going on and everything, and then out of nowhere there's then this news about Madeline McCann, which is convenient, I'll say. Because
they actually think that they've. I mean, I've met the McCanns. Like, she definitely, she had no involvement. I've never met anybody who's haunted. I had a child at the same age as Madeline when she went missing, and me and my sister didn't ever think there was any guilt at all, but they've been told now that they have concrete evidence that she's dead, which must be horrific. But to some degree, I do look around and think, well, all of you who were going on that she was involved in the murder, which she clearly never was, I would hope that there'll be a point where they all apologise, because those poor people have had the worst thing happen to them. And I was a single mum for a long time. And as a single mum, you know, you go to the shop when your kids are in bed. You don't think somebody's going to run in, nick your kids and do one. And you pay the ultimate price, and they did. So it's awful. But you're right, the way that the press pump you full of information, it's more at the moment as well. You look at the change now. So if you're watching this in 3 years' time, they'll be like, what the hell are these people talking about? We're talking about coronavirus. But what they're doing now is they're doing a lot of that kind of like, when's it going to be lifted? Is it going to be lifted? And again, it's very much about keeping us in a state of not knowing, because when you're not knowing and uncertain, they can control us. And they're definitely seeing how this will play out. I mean, they can do one for the second phase of lockdown. I'm doing none of it. I will be out on the streets being completely normal. Screw you with your second lockdown phase. Not happening.
That's fair enough. To bring it back to the Madeline McCann situation. I wasn't aware that you'd met
Yeah.
McCann. So how'd you come about meeting them?
Just because when they first happened, they were in ITV studios, and I used to work for Good Morning Britain and Daybreak. Well, Good Morning TV, it was GMTV at the time, and then Daybreak. So they were just there one day, and I had a quick, very brief chat in the corridor with her, and just very briefly had that conversation. But all I can tell you is that when you look in somebody's eyes like that, you just know when somebody's haunted. You know, after years of working in therapy, you can't not know that. And I've also worked with the detectives who were involved in the Madeline McCann case, of which there's a mixed bag regarding how people feel, but the ones who were properly involved just without doubt know that they were completely innocent. All the stuff that you see about the interviews and stuff, it's a very biased perspective. You have to understand that when you're in a foreign country and you are in that situation and you have a legal team, which is what happened, because obviously Jerry and Kate were very well off, you know, as far as they had a great position.
Both doctors, weren't they?
Both doctors. Well, he's one of the biggest and best heart surgeons in the UK now. He's incredible. She's never worked since. She's just concentrated all her efforts on Maddie. So, you know, this has been her life, trying to find some kind of semblance of normality and looking after her child, even though that child is absent. But I think what you see with that whole situation was they were going to obviously speak to people about what do we do, when they were advised not to speak to the Portuguese police because they're known for not necessarily looking after the interviews in the correct way. Why would you're not going to want to they knew straight away that they were trying to implicate them as parents. I mean, I actually also know, because I had the joy of working on some shows around this, the people who were in the apartments just opposite and above, they were there on the scene, and they responded when we were talking about it, that the screams that came and the hysteria, that they'll never let go of that noise, because it was like she was like a wounded animal. You can't fake that. The problem is, I've worked on so many crime cases and so many murder cases, you cannot fake it. You just can't do it.
This has completely changed my perspective, because I've said to many people, like, you see all these conspiracy theories.
Oh, I know, the cadaver dogs, etc. She was with, you know, of course the cadaver dogs might have said, well, number one, no disrespect to the police or to anybody who has private cadaver dogs. I mean, there's only 2 really well-trained ones in the whole world, really, and they cost a lot of money to get to your crime scene. They're also really shit. Sorry. The police will tell you, you know, a lot of the time they find stuff and then they take the dog over to it. Like, it's just not, they sit down and all that. We are known that they get confused by lots of different, their dogs are beautifully clever, but they're not quite clear about what they're meant to do, you know. And also, if you want to use the fact that they smell dead bodies, she'd been present at 2 dead bodies in the last week and a half, you know, she'd signed them off. But again, they're really lovely animals, and they're great when they're chasing a robber, but they're not the best thing in the world when they're trying to sniff out. They're good with drugs, you know, as long as they're not covered in coffee. But, just a bit of a tip for those.
Do you know something here, Emma?
Yeah, just if you're going to smuggle some drugs,
hang on, just need to send a message to a friend here. So obviously you do Britain's Darkest Taboos as well.
Yeah, that was I did 7 series of that. I don't do that anymore because hello, my husband's walking in. Just walk into a live podcast. This is the kind of thing that only can happen on coronavirus. I hope that you were getting in touch just to see whether I wanted a cup of tea during this, to keep it real. Okay, that's fine. Forgiven. So I did 7 series of Britain's Darkest Taboos with Kerry Nixon, the first 3, and then they changed the cast, and it just never felt right for me. Dr. Kerry Nixon and me were really close friends through that series. You know, we met and we got on really well, and I always felt quite aggrieved that they didn't carry on with her, because we just had a nice rhythm, and I really cared for the families. I'm still in touch with some of the families now, but unfortunately, as the original group of producers, etc., moved on and the new ones came, they never had that same connection. So I felt like we didn't do the job that we should have. So I decided not to do the final series that they offered me, and I might return if they bring back Kerry Nixon. There is talks about that, but I do Judge Ringer's crime stories. I've done, I think, 7 series of that now, and I've done a recent one called Vengeance, and I hopefully have got a new one with CBS. So
I was about to say, I heard you say in your mental health chat, like live. I heard you say it the other day.
Yeah,
I thought, as soon as I heard that, I literally went to my nose for that's something to speak about.
I am hoping that that will come off. Again, my dream, if I'm really honest, my dream would be to work with Dr. Kerry Nixon again, and to do something that's a bit more gritty and where we explore what makes a killer, because I think that we have a really poor understanding of what we see murderers and killers as versus what they really are, because most people, even the worst of people, are 80 to 90% good. Do you know what I mean? It's just
So
the other bit that isn't.
yeah, with that concept then, I take it you're aware of the Lewis Danes.
Yeah, of course I know. Brett Bednar and Lewis Danes, he's a
Yeah.
twat.
So do you think that Lewis Danes is 80 to 90% good then, would you say?
I think that Lewis Danes is a sociopath,
Yeah.
but the idea that a sociopath is completely beyond redemption at his age would probably be untrue, based on the fact that the evidence that we now have, it's not really massively researched in the UK, because we are quite comfortable with saying you are criminally insane, you can never come out, and then we've dealt with the issue. And I completely understand that. If Lewis Danes had done to my child what he did to Brett Bednar, I would want him dead.
Yeah.
You know, that's the maternal
I think it
feeling.
goes without saying.
It's, you would want him dead, and you would want to torture him, and you would want him to feel the agony that that gorgeous boy Brett felt, because
Yeah,
he
because
was a
didn't he
gorgeous
torture
boy.
him
He
as
was
well?
horrific, sexually sadistic, horrendous. Most chilling is when you hear the phone call to the actual police, and it's so controlled, so contrived. He stops the operator on several times because he wants to play with her in the way that he feels fits his narrative. And he's living out a very clear fantasy, without a doubt. And then, of course, when he went to prison, he managed to get access to a blog page,
Yeah, I remember
and he
about
started
this.
to affect the family. So you can see that he has that desire to be centre stage in his world. But what we know from the States is often there's an area of the brain that just simply isn't formed correctly. So this part of the brain doesn't light up correctly and isn't usually as big as yours and mine. So the area where we have altruism and care and empathy, they don't necessarily have it as largely, you know, it's not largely there in the way that it is with us. So one, you've got this issue. Then secondly, add to that, you might have got some attachment issues. You may have felt rejected by your primary caregivers. You may have dealt with humiliation in your life, you know, all these kind of things. That's another activation potential. And then on top of that, imagine the fact that you're trying to find and seek some kind of power, and you also have a predilection because you might spend your time watching hardcore porn, which is a real problem because it alters the way that your brain works. So you basically desensitize yourself to that kind of stuff. So in America, they look at all of that, and then they do something called biofeedback, which is where you teach the person to control particular computer programs with their brain, and it helps them to self-regulate. And we know that that seems to alter the way that their chemistry works, and it kind of reprograms and repositions the way the brain interacts. And as long as they don't take drugs or alcohol, or they stay on track, it can alter psychopathic behavior, so to speak. So it's not that he's beyond redemption, but whether he would deserve redemption is the bigger question there. So it's not that you could not help him, and whilst he is inside, you couldn't change the way that he feels and give him a sense of conscience. And it would take a lot of work and a lot of therapy, and also not necessarily the outcome that you want. But I'm saying you could potentially, but whether he's worth that is where we meet a stumbling block. Because if you're thinking about maybe £1 million worth of care and intention for him, when we might never let him out, because I mean, he's one of those that I think might never walk the streets again. He might, but I think at parole they would see that he's somebody with a particular kind of personality trait that might be really dangerous for us all to have on our streets. But yeah, it's the same when people talk about the Bulger killers, you know. The instinct that you have is that surely it would be better just to exterminate these human beings. But you see, that comes from the very same place that those individuals kill from. There is no righteous killing. There's no righteous murder. That's what's wrong with the death penalty. You can't have righteous murder. It's just murder. It's homicide. In the States, when you put somebody to death by any of their methods on the death sentence, it goes down as homicide. It goes down as murder. So there's no reality of right to kill, just what we build our schemas on socially. So I suppose that even though instinct says I must kill this person because if you want to be better than that, then you have to allow empathy and compassion to find its place. So you look at Venables and you look at, you know, Thompson. Venables has reoffended and so on and so forth. You look at Thompson, he's married, well, he's in a long-term partnership with children, and he lives a very law-abiding life. He got all his exams, he sorted all of his things when he was in the secure unit, and he's gone on to produce an adult who will be, to some degree, part of our society's fabric, contributing to it. And that's where it becomes difficult, because morality has different shades of acceptance, doesn't it?
So where would you see the line then, as it comes to like reforming, etc.?
I think that children should always be given the opportunity to be fully reformed and free. I don't think a child murderer is anything like an adult murderer.
So is that up to 18 then?
I think that I think I'd probably, if I'm really honest, think of childhood maybe under 25, which probably stuns people. But because I've had the real privilege of working with young offenders, and I know where they come from a lot of the time, and I know what's happened to them, and I know the scars they carry, and it's not always the same. There are always people who are just outside of that frame of reference. You know, there are people who, by all intents and purposes, should be lovely human beings, you know, born to nice people. But when it comes down to most of the people that I've worked with who are severely problematic, you know, they've suffered a massive incidence of sexual abuse, physical abuse, usually really dysfunctional families, poverty, low education, low social standing and status, born to the wrong parents in the wrong postcode, rejected by whole heaps of authority, that can't not have an impact. There are identically people who have had that, who go on to change the world for the better. So again, we can never excuse the behaviour. The behaviour is reprehensible, and the actions that they carry out are reprehensible. But should it have been that society has created such vacuums of rejection in our society and such poverty and need and not met those? Because if that were the case, and as a community that we really looked after the slowest of the slow and the poorest of the poor and the most hard dealt to the most hard dealt, then these cases probably wouldn't arise in the way that they do. And of course, there will always be those who, as I said at the beginning, fail to be given any excuses. But then I suppose when you think about it on a nature level, human beings are really interesting, because human beings have basically created a fabric of our society that no longer requires psychopaths. But psychopaths would once have been really helpful. I mean, if you were a king, you would have wanted several psychopaths around you who killed without conscience, and as long as you really looked after them and made them feel super special around your big round table, they would absolutely serve you without a problem. You know, as long as they got their needs met fully and they got the respect they needed and they could use whoever they wanted, they would go off and they'd murder whoever you fancied and they'd be fine, wouldn't even worry about going to bed at night, right?
Not like the royal family now.
Maybe quite a few. Well, I mean, I think in the army and the navy and in some places we have these kind of people who just can go and see all these horrible things and then go to sleep at night. You know, I worry more about them than the ones who are traumatized. So you've kind of got, haven't you, an instinct. Evolutionarily, our society has grown past that. We don't need you anymore. But I'm sure that nature still creates them, because the fabric of our DNA still creates those kind of behaviors.
No, definitely. I think we should go on to a bit of a lighter topic. We've been a bit great to that.
What do you mean, murder? Murder's a light topic.
I mean, I'm happy to speak about it more, but I feel like I'll get like 25 messages from mates saying, "God, you've been speaking about murder the entire time." So, as well as Junior the squirrel, I also saw that there's Dobby the dog.
Oh, I have more than one dog.
Yeah.
I have Dobby, so I have Poppy Sue, Molly Boo, Wookie Woo, and Dobby Doo. Then I have Chase and Blue. So I have 2 cats, 4 dogs, and Junior the squirrel. But
so
Dobby's
quite a busy
recent
household then.
Yeah, it's horrendous, really. It's awful. Somebody said to me the other day, I need to move to somewhere with land. I was not allowed animals when I was a kid, and so obviously now I can. I just don't know when to stop. But dogs and cats make you happy. They just do. And squirrels are exceptional. So do you not have animals?
I don't personally. The people I live with do. And
what have you got?
They have rats.
Do you know rats are as clever as dogs? If you form a relationship with them, they're as clever as dogs.
I don't want to. The tails creep me out.
A lot of people say that.
No, at
Tails are
first I
basically a
was
rat's
fine with
tail
it.
with fur.
It creeps me out. Like when I go downstairs like 3 o'clock in the morning to make myself a drink, I just see like the cages, like they've moved it into like the lounge or like just somewhere out the way. I'll see it. I'm fucking hell. Like, I do want a dog. I've always wanted a dog.
Yeah, dogs are amazing.
When I was growing up, my dad told me that I had a dog called Fido, but he was nocturnal, you see. So when I was asleep, he'd be awake. And I saved up some pocket money once. Didn't tell anyone. And I bought like a dog bowl. It was like £1 or something from Tesco's. But I was like, oh, I got this for Fido. And then my dad went, Fido ran away during the night. Now I went to a Catholic primary school. Obviously, I'm sort up about this. And I think it was like the first time like me, mum and dad went to like a mass sort of thing. I was reading a prayer. Dear God, please pray for my dog Fido who's run away. You see me mum and dad laughing in like
that's
the
hilarious.
church in front of everyone.
They're such buggers, aren't they?
They are.
Thanks, Mum. Thanks, Dad. Not at all, not at all bastards,
That's putting it lightly, but
yeah.
Anyway.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think dogs and cats and all animals, we're, like I said, we're all plant-based. So like for me, just bringing nature in just makes my house a happier place. I think that the old saying that having an animal makes coming back to an empty house coming home, it's really true. And on lockdown, it's been even better because I've taken in another rehoming dog because I can't handle it when I find out that dog needs rehoming. And if I can give it a home, I will. And we're kind of quite lucky. We have a really big garden because obviously I live in the north as opposed to in the south in like a 1-bedroom flat with my entire family, because that's what you can afford in the south. But because I live in the north, I can afford like a really nice big garden. So we don't have the hassle of having animals that are cooped up because they've just got that kind of freedom. So it's, I don't know how people cope without nature. I prefer nature to the modern world. My dream is to have a community one day. I used to live on a commune a long time ago, and I would like to have a community. Although my friend reckons that is a cult. My friend reckons that I'll just
I was
like,
saying
I
my
am
head
your
was saying
leader
cult
now.
then.
I am your leader now. No, I like to live in a community, and I think where humans come to heal and nature comes to heal. I think that would be a great opportunity.
So like sort of like respite.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been building an app for the last 4 years, and it's going to get released really soon. Right. And it's free for everybody, but I'm really hoping it'll just blow up, and then I could just sell it and then just buy a really beautiful retreat and just start that journey. Because I think I want to live in the sun.
Do you?
No.
So, UK or abroad?
Abroad. I used to live in Bali a long time ago.
I remember hearing about this on Brian's podcast.
And it was amazing, and I very much enjoyed it. And I wouldn't necessarily live there, but what it taught me was the waking up to the sea and the sun and the quiet life and the slow life was a preferable experience. As much as I love the UK, I think lockdowns really made me reevaluate it. I don't know whether it has
definitely. Like at the start of lockdown, I was going to bed at 8 o'clock in the morning, waking up at 3:30 in the afternoon, and then since then, unless I was working, I've been waking up at 7 o'clock on the dot every single day, not by choice, because for whatever reason, the neighbour needs to mow his grass every single morning at 7.
Everybody else has been doing their house up. Mine's just falling apart because I've been so bored but so busy. So it's like,
put this up.
It's great though. I thought that was great when I saw it. I was like, that's a good backdrop. Trying to get a message across to anybody watching there.
Just Newcastle United.
For life. Yeah. My husband's a Saltburn, he comes from a Saltburn, a Middlesbrough originally, but then Saltburn, and he is of course a major Middlesbrough fan. So it doesn't matter that my boys are both into United. My husband is like you. He's taken his original roots and just brought them there, and he loves it. It's as simple as that.
No, definitely. Well, speaking of you lads, I remember, because obviously, like I told you earlier, I found you through Geordie's podcast. I remember you saying how one of your lads wanted to be a doctor.
Oh, he did.
Oh, has it changed now?
Yeah, so basically, he did want to be a doctor. But so basically, he'd always wanted to be a doctor. He'd always felt that that was what his calling was. He wanted to be able to kind of heal people, but I also think he wanted to be able to travel. I think he saw it as like a real opportunity. You know, you can go to any country, you can live in any country, because they're always desperate for doctors. And then my dad got poorly 2 years ago, and obviously he initially got sepsis from a catheter that they'd incorrectly left in, and that caused something called septic shock. His kidneys failed, and then sadly it created a toxified reaction in his brain, so he started to suffer from something called delirium, which is like psychosis. And when they got out of hospital again, unfortunately they screwed the treatment up, so my dad never really got out of psychosis. He was always in and out of it. And Tide, who's my eldest, is very much like me on the way that he processes the word emotionally, and he kind of was watching the way that that was going on, and I think he started to lose his love really for the whole system at that point. And then my dad killed himself, and when my dad killed himself last July, Tide came out of that and made a decision that he wouldn't do anything in his life that would make him unhappy. So he decided not to do his medical. He was originally going to do psychology, biology and chemistry, and he dropped chemistry. He just said, I just want to do what makes me happy. And I'm quite happy for them to do that. My youngest son wants to be a stuntman. He doesn't care about his academia, and I've let that go. It's okay. You know, nobody should do things that make them unhappy. Nobody should live a life like that. It's awful. So when you've been touched by suicide so poignantly and personally, you can't be anything like the person you used to be ever again. It's just, you're not that human being anymore. I'm not who I was when you listened to me on Brian's podcast. I never will be that person again.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to go into specifics, but I've had experience with suicide in around myself and my family. And it was around when I was telling you about all that shit happened. It was around that time.
Yeah.
And I feel like with that and everything that was going on, like I was saying, I feel like I was so different 2-3 years ago. I feel like without that, obviously I was going to change from everything that happened, but without all the suicide stuff going around, I don't think I'd be like the way I'd say, like, it's just like simple things like, so for instance, I've got this is my pride and joy in my life. It's my Mad Men box set, right? I was watching that when all this stuff was going on. And at first when I was watching, it's like, it's just a TV show, I'll watch it. And then I've now dedicated a day to the year, so it's 30th of May. Every year is Mad Men Day, where I sit down, I'll have a glass of scotch, I'll have these, and I'll just watch it. And there's always like one scene where it like directly addresses like everything and that. And it just makes me like cry my eyes out every time. And I feel like that's like a coping mechanism, but there are so many people who don't have a coping mechanism. Like,
yeah,
I probably shouldn't say it, but there was a girl who was my age who I didn't know directly, but it's sort of like, you know her through someone else. It's one of them things. She's a very talented girl. She's a singer. She's called Beth Palmer. She had a song in the charts. I don't know if you saw it. She took her own life towards the beginning of lockdown. And I remember getting a phone call from a friend, Joe. He told me, and he was good friends with her. He'll hate me for saying this, but he was good friends with her, you know, and I could just tell that, because he's the most reserved person you'll ever meet. Like, he won't show the only emotion you'll see from him is laughter.
Yeah.
But I could tell on the phone that it's a horrible, horrible thing for anyone to go through. And while it is horrible, I do feel like sometimes it'll mold you into a different person. It could be for worse, but it could be for better, definitely. And
trauma always has the capacity to grow things. I mean, I think that when my dad killed himself, I had the closest relationship with my father. You know, it's very well known in my family that me and him were the most similar, and don't get me wrong, our family was close, whatever. My brother and him were like best friends, but my dad and me, there was still that I was his daughter, and he was just constantly proud of me. My dad gave me a round of applause for crossing the road. It's how I've brought up my own children. You know, I'm not bothered about what exam results they get. I don't care about whether they pass or fail in those kind of bollocks that are the education system that makes no sense and doesn't actually have any bearing on your intelligence. And to bring kids up with an idea of whether they're a success or failure is disgusting to me, and I won't be any part of it. And because I was quite lucky and I stopped really going to school at 13, I was involved in the psychological and psychiatric system because I was just a refuser. I'm quite lucky in the fact that even early on, I just questioned the fact that it had to be a certain way. And I still stand by that. I don't believe that you have to follow a system. I think you can create an alternative. And now I'm probably one of the most successful people in my field as far as front facing in the media. And I prove that if you stop listening to what you're told is the way and you just make your own way, you do it better because you're not competing with anybody. You don't have anybody to compete with. You're creating your own direction. With my father, and that was who formed me. He made me that way. He always made me feel like I was good enough when everybody else was telling me that I was off my rocker. And that solid foundation is something that I built my world around. So when I suffered from anxiety when my boys were very little, my relationship broke down. And the reason for that was partly my relationship breaking down, obviously, but actually it was down to a blood disorder that I didn't realize. And I had to have blood transfusions. And that was all discovered 6 months after I'd started with this awful onset of anxiety. And my dad would come every single night and he would literally get me as I'd put the boys to bed, and I'd always keep it together. The boys had no idea that I was suffering. And then I would just fall apart, and he would just sit with me and he would just tell me it was going to be all right. And he didn't have any reason to tell me that, nor did he have any advice as to why it would be all right. But I would just know that it was okay because he was telling me it was going to be all right. And I'd always said I'd built my whole world around knowing that no matter how shit things were, I would always feel that I could do anything because I always knew it was okay and I could always go home if it didn't work out. So this has been the first year where I've known I can't go home. And that was something I imagined when I found my dad. I got there and cut him down, tried to do CPR very badly. And then the paramedic didn't resuscitate him, even though he was completely apparently able to have been resuscitated at that point. It was just a catalogue of disasters for the whole year leading up to that particular suicide. And in that moment, I remember thinking, I've never, ever been able to connect why somebody would kill themselves. I've never been able to do it. You know, I've always struggled when I've had clients and people who are suicidal. I've always wanted to kind of stretch into that world and imagine how that must feel for them. But, you know, you full of platitudes and why people shouldn't and so on and so forth. But those days after Dad killed himself, I remember thinking, this is how it feels to be suicidal. This is it. This is that feeling. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm going to remember this. I'm going to hold this feeling because this feeling is so important, because now when somebody expresses why they want to kill themselves, I'm going to know how that reasoning behind it feels. And it's very much about, you just don't want to deal with the pain. You just feel it's too overwhelming, too enormous, too scary. And it's catastrophic as far as the way that you feel in your world. And if I hadn't had my boys, I would have killed myself. There's no doubt. It wasn't about my life being terrible. It wasn't about the fact that I couldn't see that I had people who loved me. Got nothing to do with any of those things. All the things that I thought would give you anchors to the here and now and to keep you here, they were irrelevant. The only thing that anchored me was my kids' pain, because I could see that if I were to do that, I don't know whether they'd survive it either, if that makes sense. But if they hadn't been there, if that layer hadn't been there, my husband or anybody else, it didn't matter. I didn't want to cope with the pain. So now when I approach people with suicidality, I see them in such more of a real and open and honest way. And also, I now understand that very often in suicide, you don't need to kill yourself. You need to kill the life. It's the life that needs to be killed around you. And I think people get confused about that. And also, I talk about it all the time. So when somebody says to me, how are you? I use that as an open invitation. Like, if you ask me how I am, I'm going to tell you. So I'll tell them. And if they don't know how to manage it, well, the next time they ask somebody that question, they will, because they'll think about how to manage it. Or when people ask me about suicide or ask me about what's happened in the past month, I tell them, because I think we need to get better at having that open conversation, because people are killing themselves every single day in the UK. And it's because they can't see another way. They're looking for an escape route, and they're not weak. No, they're not broken. They're just desperately seeking a solution, and they choose a final solution. And for me, that's a complete failure on everything around them, the community that they're brought up in, the society that doesn't talk about it, the services that don't exist for them, and most importantly, their own, when I say failure, I'm not blaming them for their suicide, I'm saying their failure to believe that there was an opportunity to find a new way forward. You know, that's all there. So all of that's preventable. That's what drives me mad. The only thing that you could say is, when is it not preventable? And even then it's questionable. You know, maybe if somebody has a psychotic attack completely out of the blue. I've worked with somebody whose dad got psychotic for 5 minutes. He threw himself in front of a train. He'd never had psychosis before. Now, in that circumstance, I can get it, right? I get it. Very, very little we could have done. But for the most part, every other single suicide is completely preventable and should be prevented. So it's like my life's work now to just try to use that experience, and also to teach people about grief, because every single day I'm in agony with my father. It's Father's Day this week. I'm in agony with it. It's always going to be agony. It's never going to feel any better, ever. That's part of my pain, is the love that I feel for him. How could it ever diminish? How could it ever be okay? Because he's not here, and I adored him, and he was the most vital and funny and exuberant and loving and safe human you'd ever have met. And he had time for everybody, and we couldn't get anybody in the church because it was too full. And this was a guy who, by all intents and purposes, should have lived till 95 without a problem. And this stupid thing happened that caused all of this travesty. And I haven't got that. So I'm never going to let go of that origin of pain. It's just horrific. But that's only a part of my life. So I can have that terrible agony. And this is for anybody, if you've been affected by suicide, or you get affected by suicide, you need to hear this, because that part of your life will never change. It's always going to be that horrific, but you build your world around all the other elements. And so your life still has meaning. You still can find a sense of peace in your world, and you can certainly go on to live a happy and healthy life, and trauma doesn't have to define you. And I think that we don't talk about that enough. You know, I can feel in agonizing pain every day about my father, and I can feel joy about my children, or about my husband, or about my squirrel. And I think that we need to have those conversations more, and we need to enforce the reality of that, so that people aren't as scared. Because when somebody kills themselves around you, the average person who is connected to that person is 10 times more likely to take their own life. Who recognize, the World Health Organization state that if you are affected by suicide, your statistical probability of killing yourself goes off the chart. So unless we are reaching all of those people who splinter from that origin of suicide, we are failing, and they do nothing. You know, my dad killed himself traumatically. We are suing the NHS, and we are going to win. But that's nothing for me. It doesn't make any difference to me. I'm just teaching them a lesson, because we can't carry on this way. But what I do think is ridiculous is the World Health Organization have that information, and yet the minute that that person is taken away, it's over. There's no help. There's no help. You know, imagine being somebody whose child did it. No help. So this is the UK, in a apparently developed community where we don't give a shit about mental health.
It's ridiculous for me, the amount of older people who just discredit mental health in general. Like, I remember,
it's not just older people, it's younger people. There's a lot of young people who don't believe in mental health being an issue.
The most annoying thing for me, I can pinpoint the exact moment. It was on Boxing Day. I was at my auntie's. I was in the garden having a cigarette, and my other nana was there, and she went, "What's up?" I'd had a really shit Christmas. I just wanted to get away from everything. I'd go, "Oh, you know, I'm just a bit down in the dumps." I mean, most of my friends will know, but I've had depression.
Yeah.
Diagnosed depression for at least 3.5 years. I think it stretched before that, but...
Are you on sertraline or fluoxetine or citalopram? What are you on?
I'm on Prozac.
Oh, you want to say fluoxetine?
Yeah. So I was in the garden having a cigarette, and I just said, I'm a bit down in dumps, because I like, my dad doesn't know. My sister is the only member of my family who knows, because I just don't like chatting about it. We're not a chatting family. I'm in this garden, I'm having a cigarette. I say I'm down in dumps. She goes, "Well, you're young, you'll get over it." And it's the same thing every time. They just think because we're young, we'll get over it. But there is a fact that some of the things that lead to depression can last for years. Like, I know so many people who are affected directly by this, and they don't get the help. But I'm one of the lucky ones. I'm the one who actually has been able to get help. I know someone in particular, they've been trying to get help for years, and it's like young, it's hormones, it's fine.
You kind of, the thing about depression is there's only 6 types of depression we can treat with medication. So the rest, it comes down to meditate, don't medicate. So one of the things that I think young people struggle with, of course, you've got that age gap. So it's less about her thinking you'll get over it and more about her inability to know what to say. That's the big problem, because when you're brought up in a scenario where feelings weren't talked about, you don't develop a narrative around how to explore those. And also to say to you, well, you'll get over it, whilst that can feel quite disrespectful, actually what she's really saying is, please be well, because I love you. That's what people do. When it comes down to young people and their power, mental illness and mental health issues need to be talked about more openly. So arguably, it shouldn't be about you telling your parents because you want their help. It should more be about you saying to your parents, yeah, I have depression, I'm on antidepressants, because you own it more. So it becomes more of a, I'm not ashamed of this, I don't have anything to hide, this is a completely normal human reaction. I have depression, it's fine. I am not depression, I have depression, much like, you know, you might have a kidney disorder or whatever. What's really important is when you've been on antidepressants for like 3.5 years, you need to explore, like, what is the type of depression that you're experiencing? What contributed to that depression? Is the contributing factors still around? Because arguably, if not, can I look at maybe exploring different avenues such as therapy, or maybe looking at something like transcranial magnetic stimulation, which is all about removing inflammation on the brain, and it's completely non-invasive. It's just electrical pulses into the brain that's really impacted. There's things like ketamine infusions. There are new things that are coming out to treat with it. In Manchester, I think Withenshaw Hospital are doing something on psilocybin, so magic mushrooms, the active ingredient in that, which is really having a huge impact on depression. So it's never feeling, when you've got depression, like you are on a particular medication and a path without always exploring all the others, because otherwise you become a passenger in it, if that makes sense. So if you are on antidepressants and you still feel depressed, the antidepressants aren't effective. So then it's like, well, there's no point being on this medication, because actually I need to be an active participant in my healing. So I would ask those questions if you're listening to this and you're kind of thinking, well, I've been on antidepressants for years and it really doesn't have that much of an impact, or it just numbs me a little bit. Then it's okay, well, we need to look at different things of measuring that. Because the other thing, in the UK, we have this ability to wish to deny horrible feelings. It's some reason, I don't know why. When I was younger, I used to, drugs or alcohol, because they're really effective at changing your state. So when you're dealing with problematic feelings, you want to get away from them. So dropping a pill or drinking some vodka, it's effective, it works, but only temporarily. And certainly when it comes down to like taking a pill, then you just feel utterly shit afterwards, because your feelings come back and they're even in more technicolor, if that makes sense. But one of the things I think is problematic for young people is we talk about feelings, but we don't teach people how to manage them, or even how to understand and articulate them. So when I was a kid or a young adult, I used to genuinely think that if I felt like a bad feeling, I had to kind of try to get rid of it. I had to numb it. I had to avoid it. And as I've grown older, I've realized that no, like my feeling is it's my information base. So it's an emotional prompt. It's basically telling me what I need to know. So if I feel depressed, as opposed to me numbing it or trying to just medicate my depression, I accept it and just live with it. Depression is not teaching you that. Depression's there to teach you motivation. It's to push you through. It's to tell you, right, this isn't working for us. We need to do some stuff together, because we are not doing what we need to be doing to feel happier and healthier and more content. So what can I try to kind of connect with that? Now, I know it's hard when you've not got the motivation because of depression, which is where some antidepressants can be helpful. But for the most part, it's like, what's it teaching you? If you feel afraid, you're being taught be brave. If you're feeling anxious, you're being taught be calm. So every feeling is worthy and every feeling has meaning. But in the Western world, we do a lot to try to avoid them or push them away. So I think we could do a lot more good to help younger adults and young people who are very much able to start taking those traits and strategies on, to kind of work through it in a better and more grown way.
No, definitely. Like, there are certain, like, I know I just feel conscious about it. I've always felt like stigmatisms like around it. Like when I was in sixth form earlier this year, there was an incident where I got into an argument with someone and we were both having a go at each other, and the topic of depression came up. I've then gone a bit crazy. We're all sent out. And when I go back in, I'm told to sit on the other side of the room, and there are these people in the class, and I heard one of them say, well, I knew he was a mess, but I didn't know he was depressed. oh well, let's go with it. And there's stuff like that which I can laugh at. But then there are the people who are, who are depressed, who don't speak about it, and they're not given the support they need. Like, and I don't care saying this, the Trafford Young Mental Health Services are abysmal, because that's what I originally applied for. I went on a self-help sheet. I said, I did the quiz and that, they told me, right, when are you free? Did like a phone interview thing. I literally told them any day of the week, midweek, as long as it's past 3 o'clock, I'm fine. And weekends, whenever. First time they ringed me, it's 3 months later, and they said, yeah, how does Monday's 11:30 sound? And it's like, they're supposed to write it down, and then I never heard from them again, so I had to seek other avenues and that. And I just feel like for the people who don't know that there are other avenues, they're fucked. Like, there's no going around it.
Yeah, and it also, there's an assumption that people understand what they're feeling, and a lot of people don't, because when you feel depressed, actually, lots of people don't realize that's depression. They just think there's something broken about them. They just think that waking up with dread, or not being able to get the motivation to go anywhere, or just feeling completely worthless and helpless, or feeling constantly like angry and resentful and down, they think that there's something wrong with them, as opposed to the fact that there is something going on in their brain or emotional experience that needs to be dealt with. There's nothing broken about them at all, but they don't even get to the point of acknowledgement, because they're just so unsure of what they're experiencing that they can't really place it, and they don't have people to kind of bounce off. And it's funny, in Manchester we have, and actually there's a charity called Kooth, KOOTH.com, and Kooth.com is really good. It's for young people between 13 and 25, and it's basically a website that's interactive with counsellors and also with other young people, and that's been set up because there aren't services for young people. So it's kind of handy if you've not got any help to have things like that available to you. But the government just uses charities to prop up the abject failure of the system. So what you're talking about is a normal story. It's just a normal story. And the other thing is, we get a lot of people who work in the services, clinical psychologists, therapists, psychologists and psychiatrists per se, who are so worn out by the amount of people that they have to see and reach that they don't even feel that invested in it anymore, because they're just absolutely done out of their ability, because of the fact that they're working with acute trauma 24/7. They're exhausted. The system needs a mass overhaul with compassion and care, and it's going to take time to do that, if it ever happens, or whether I will just have to start my own community and then just completely prove that there's another way, or just like start squirrel therapy centres.
Squirrel therapy centres would be fun, just sat there.
There'd be a few people bleeding, but never mind.
What's going to happen there?
What did it do to me? Well, my eyes.
I've really enjoyed your time.
Oh, it's been lovely chatting to you.
Yeah, hopefully you can come back another time.
Yeah, of course, anytime. And if you want me to get you on Dr. Kerry Nixon or anything, if you want to do a crime one, I'll put a good word in for you and you can get her on.
Yeah, definitely.
No problem.
All right, thank you guys for watching.
Luke, it's been a joy. Finlay, what a letdown. You should feel very, very bad.
He's going to see this and he's going to be really upset now.
Absolutely, you should feel really bad, Finlay.
All right, guys, thanks for watching.
Take care, guys.